The crack of a gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Redemption Springs, Arizona Territory, 1881, sending Delilah Kirkwood diving behind an overturned wagon just as the bullet splintered the wooden barrel where she'd been standing seconds before. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she clutched her father's old pocket watch, the only possession she'd managed to grab before fleeing. This wasn't how she'd imagined her 22nd birthday would unfold, running for her life, while a corrupt land baron's men hunted her like a wounded deer. "I know you're out there, Miss Kirkwood," a gruff voice bellowed. "You can't hide forever. Mr. Holloway says that land is now fair and square." Delilah bit back a bitter laugh. Fair and square? Nothing about Theodore Holloway was fair or square. The man had forged her father's signature on land deeds after his passing 3 weeks ago, claiming their modest homestead as his own. When she'd confronted him with proof of the forgery, her father's distinctive handwriting on his last letter to her Holloway had simply smiled that snake oil smile and set his men upon her. "There's nothing fair about theft, Mr. Daniels," she shouted back, her voice steadier than she felt. "He stole my home." Another shot rang out, closer this time. Delilah flinched as wood splinters showered over her head. She needed to move, and fast. Gathering her skirts, she crawled along the side of the wagon, dirt caking her once fine blue dress, the one she'd made specially for her birthday celebration that would never happen now. "Come out now, and maybe the boss'll let you take your personal effects before we burn the place," Daniels called, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached. Delilah's fingers closed around a hefty rock. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it might buy her a moment's distraction. With a silent prayer, she hurled it as far as she could in the opposite direction. The clatter against a distant water trough drew curses and hurried footsteps away from her position. Taking her chance, Delilah sprinted toward the livery stable at the edge of town. If she could just reach her father's horse, the collision knocked the breath from her lungs as she rounded the corner and slammed directly into a solid wall of a man. Strong hands steadied her, preventing her fall. Delilah looked up, ready to fight, only to find herself staring into the most startling pair of gray-blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Whoa there," the stranger said, his voice deep and calm despite her obvious distress. "Where's the fire, madam?" He was taller than most men in these parts, with broad shoulders beneath a dust-covered duster coat. A weathered Stetson cast shadows across a face that had clearly seen its share of sun and hardship, yet couldn't be more than 30 years of age. The silver star pinned to his vest caught the afternoon light. "They're after me," Delilah whispered urgently, trying to pull away. "Please, I need to. There she is." Daniel's shout came from behind her, accompanied by the ominous click of a revolver being cocked. The stranger's expression hardened as he gently but firmly positioned Delilah behind him, turning to face the approaching men. There were 3 of them now, each armed and wearing Holloway's distinctive red neckerchiefs. "Afternoon, gentlemen," the stranger said, his hand resting casually near his holstered Colt. "Something I can help you with?" Daniels faltered slightly at the sight of the badge. "This ain't your business, Marshal. We're just retrieving a trespasser from Mr. Holloway's property." "Is that so?" The Marshal's tone remained conversational, but Delilah could feel the tension radiating from him. "Funny, I don't recall Theo Holloway owning the streets of Redemption Springs. Last I checked, this here's public property." "The girl's a thief," another of Holloway's men spat. "Been stealing from the Holloway ranch." Delilah stepped forward, indignation overriding her fear. "That's a lie. He stole my home, my father's land. I was born in that house, and Holloway forged documents to steal it after my father died." The Marshal nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the 3 men. Serious accusation, that, one that should be settled proper like in a court of law, not with guns in the street where innocent folks might get hurt. He turned his head slightly toward Delilah, still keeping the men in his sight. "You got somewhere safe to stay, Miss Kirkwood, Delilah Kirkwood, and no, sir, everything I owned was in that house." Something flickered in the Marshal's eyes, compassion, perhaps, or determination. "Then you'll have mine till you find yours." Daniels took a threatening step forward. "Marshal Sadler, Mr. Holloway won't take kindly to you interfering in his business matters." "Marshal Vaughn Sadler," the lawman corrected calmly. "And you can tell Holloway that interfering with business matters that involve armed men chasing a young woman through my town is precisely my job." His coat shifted slightly, revealing not just the revolver at his hip but a second one on his other side. "Now, you boys have a choice. You can lower those weapons and head back to wherever you came from, or you can try your luck against me. Fair warning, I'm having a particularly good day with my aim." For a tense moment, Delilah thought they might actually shoot, then Daniels spat on the ground and holstered his gun. "This ain't over," he growled, backing away. "Holloway don't forget, and neither do we." "I'll make a note of that," Marshal Sadler replied evenly. "Good day, gentlemen." Only when the three men had mounted their horses and ridden out of town did the marshal fully relax his posture. He turned to Delilah, his stern expression softening. "You're bleeding, Miss Kirkwood." Delilah touched her cheek, surprised to find a trickle of blood from where a wood splinter had grazed her. "It's nothing," she said, suddenly acutely aware of how she must look dressed torn and dirty, hair falling from its pins, face streaked with dust and now blood. "Let's get that cleaned up all the same," he said, gesturing toward a modest building across the street with a sign that read Marshal's office and residence. "And you can tell me exactly what's happening with Theodore Holloway and your father's property." Delilah hesitated. She'd learned the hard way to be wary of men in positions of power in frontier towns like this one. Too often they were in the pockets of wealthy men like Holloway. As if reading her thoughts, Marshal Sadler smiled slightly. "I've been at odds with Holloway since the day I pinned on this star, Miss Kirkwood. If he's breaking the law, I want to know about it." Something in his straightforward gaze convinced her. With a nod, Delilah followed him across the dusty street, painfully aware of the curious stares from townsfolk who had witnessed the confrontation. The marshal's office was spartanly furnished but clean, with a desk, a few chairs, and 3 cells at the back, all currently empty. A doorway led to what appeared to be private quarters. "Have a seat," he offered, gesturing to a chair before disappearing through the doorway. He returned moments later with a basin of water, a clean cloth, and a small bottle. "This might sting a bit," he warned, pouring a small amount of liquid onto the cloth. Delilah flinched as he gently dabbed at the cut on her cheek. "What is that?" "Carbolic acid solution. Army surgeon taught me about it during the war, prevents festering." His touch was surprisingly gentle for such large hands. "So, Miss Kirkwood, start from the beginning. How did Holloway come to claim your father's property?" As he tended to her minor wound, Delilah recounted the events of the past month, her father's sudden illness and death, the suspicious appearance of Holloway at the funeral, and then his men arriving 3 days ago with documents bearing what appeared to be her father's signature, transferring ownership of their 160-acre homestead to Holloway Cattle Company. "I knew immediately it was forged," she explained. "My father had a distinctive way of writing his catechess my mother taught him when they were courting. I tried to show the sheriff in Copper Creek, but..." She trailed off, the memory still raw. "Sheriff Graham." Marshal Sadler guessed, his mouth tightening when she nodded. "He's been in Holloway's pocket for years. That's why I requested assignment to this town instead. Holloway's influence is growing, but it hasn't fully corrupted Redemption Springs yet." He set aside the cloth and basin, then pulled a chair across from her. "Do you have any of these documents? Or better yet, something with your father's genuine signature for comparison?" Delilah reached into her pocket and withdrew the pocket watch. Opening it carefully, she revealed a small folded paper tucked inside. "His last letter to me. I was visiting my aunt in Tucson when he fell ill. By the time I returned, he was..." Her voice caught. Marshal Sadler accepted the letter with reverence, reading it carefully before returning it. "I'm sorry about your father, Miss Kirkwood. From his words, he seems to have been a good man." "The best," she whispered. "And you're certain the land was legally homesteaded, all paperwork filed with the land office?" Delilah nodded firmly. "My father was meticulous about such things. We fulfilled all the requirements: 5 years of residence, improvements to the land, cultivation. We received the patent last year. The deed was in a strongbox in the house." The marshal leaned back, considering. Holloway's been buying up every piece of land he can get his hands on. Water rights are becoming precious in these parts with the railroad coming through. Your father's property, does it have a water source? A year-round spring, Delilah confirmed. It's what made the land so valuable to us. Father dammed it to create a small reservoir for irrigation. And valuable to Holloway, he murmured, almost to himself. Rising, he moved to a cabinet and withdrew a map, spreading it on his desk. Show me where your homestead is located. Delilah joined him at the desk, studying the territorial map before placing her finger on a spot about 15 miles northeast of town. Here, Kirkwood Homestead. Marshal Sadler's eyebrow raised slightly. That explains Holloway's interest even more. Your land sits right between his main holdings and the planned railroad spur. He needs that access. He rolled up the map decisively. Miss Kirkwood, I believe you have a legitimate grievance. I'll need to gather evidence and possibly contact the territorial judge, but a loud banging on the office door interrupted him. Before either could respond, the door burst open to reveal a red-faced older man in an expensive suit, flanked by Daniels and another tough-looking cowhand. Sadler. The man bellowed. What's this I hear about you interfering with my men conducting legitimate business? Marshal Sadler straightened to his full height, his expression cooling. Mr. Holloway, this is a surprise. I don't recall sending for you. Theodore Holloway, for it could be no other, stepped further into the room, his eyes narrowing when they landed on Delilah. So it's true, you're harboring a trespasser and thief. I've harbored neither, the marshal replied calmly. Miss Kirkwood has made some concerning allegations about property theft through document forgery, a federal offense, I might add. Holloway's face flushed darker, but he maintained his composure, turning a practiced smile toward Delilah. My dear, I understand your grief has confused you. Your father and I had a business arrangement, all perfectly legal. If you'd just been reasonable, my father would never sell to you, Delilah interrupted, anger giving her courage. He refused your offers 3 times. I was there. People change their minds when facing their mortality, Holloway said smoothly, especially when thinking of their children's futures. I offered a fair price. Marshal Sadler stepped between them. This can all be settled properly, Holloway. Bring your documentation to my office tomorrow morning. Miss Kirkwood will do the same with what she has. If everything's legitimate as you claim, there should be no issue with a formal review. Holloway's practiced smile faltered. The law has already recognized my claim. Sheriff Graham doesn't have jurisdiction here, Marshal Sadler finished. This is federal territory and I'm the federal marshal. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. For a moment, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Then Holloway adjusted his expensive coat and nodded stiffly. Very well, tomorrow it is. His eyes slid to Delilah. I'll bring the documentation proving my rightful ownership. I suggest you prepare yourself for disappointment, Miss Kirkwood. After they departed, Delilah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He'll forge more documents before tomorrow. Possibly, the marshal agreed. But forgeries can be detected, especially when done hastily. He checked his pocket watch. It's getting late, Miss Kirkwood. As I said before, you're welcome to stay here until this matter is resolved. I have spare quarters through that door, simple but clean. I typically use them for witnesses needing protection. Delilah hesitated. I couldn't impose, it's no imposition, he insisted. In fact, given Holloway's reputation, I'd feel better knowing you're somewhere safe tonight. There was practical wisdom in his words, even if propriety might suggest otherwise. Thank you, Marshal Sadler. Your kindness won't be forgotten. Something like embarrassment crossed his features. It's just Vaughn, Miss Kirkwood. Marshal Sadler makes me sound like my father. Then you must call me Delilah, she replied with a small smile, the first she'd managed all day. After all, it seems we're to be housemates, however temporarily. A hint of color touched his tanned cheeks as he nodded. Delilah it is then. Now you must be hungry. The cafe across the street serves a decent stew if you're amenable. Her stomach growled traitorously at the mention of food, reminding her she hadn't eaten since dawn. That sounds wonderful, but I'm afraid I've no money. Everything was my invitation, my expense, he said firmly, collecting his hat from a hook by the door. Consider it a welcome to Redemption Springs, however unorthodox the circumstances. As they stepped back into the waning daylight, Delilah couldn't help but marvel at how drastically her fortunes had changed in just 1 hour from being hunted through the streets to being under the protection of the town marshal. Whether that protection would be enough against a man like Theodore Holloway remained to be seen, but for the first time since her father's death, she felt a small spark of hope. The cafe was busier than Vaughn had expected, filled with the usual evening crowd of townspeople eager for a hot meal they didn't have to cook themselves. Conversations hushed momentarily as he entered with Delilah, curious eyes taking in the unfamiliar woman accompanying their marshal, before the normal buzz of chatter resumed, albeit with a new topic of speculation. Mrs. Peterson, the cafe's owner and chief gossip distributor, bustled over immediately. "Marshal, your usual table's open." Her keen eyes assessed Delilah from head to toe in one sweeping glance. "And who might this be, Mrs. Peterson?" "This is Miss Delilah Kirkwood," Vaughn said, helping Delilah to a seat at a corner table with a good view of both the door and windows, a habit from years of cautious living. "She'll be staying in town for a while." "Kirkwood?" Mrs. Peterson repeated, recognition dawning in her eyes. "Any relation to Samuel Kirkwood from over by Eagle Canyon?" "My father," Delilah confirmed quietly. "Oh, my dear, I heard of his passing. Such a fine gentleman, always so polite when he'd come to town for supplies." The older woman's sympathy seemed genuine. "My condolences." "Thank you," Delilah murmured. Mrs. Peterson sensed the heaviness of the subject and smoothly shifted to business. "Well then, what can I get for you both this evening? The venison stew is particularly good today." After ordering, Vaughn noticed Delilah's discomfort at the continued curious glances from other diners. "Don't mind them," he said quietly. "Small town curiosity. By tomorrow, they'll have found something new to talk about." "I'm afraid I've rather disrupted your routine," she said, fingers idly tracing patterns on the worn wooden tabletop. "I imagine the marshal dining with an unknown woman will fuel gossip for days." Vaughn's mouth quirked upward. "Trust me, my routine could use some disruption." Then more seriously, "Besides, protecting citizens is my routine, though I admit most don't arrive in town quite so dramatically." This drew a small laugh from her. "I've never been shot at before today. It wasn't an experience I care to repeat." "Holloway's men are becoming increasingly bold," Vaughn observed, his expression darkening. "There have been similar reports from other small ranchers and homesteaders. Intimidation, suspicious accidents, livestock going missing, nothing I could pin directly on him until now." "You really believe you can help me recover my home?" Delilah asked, hope warring with skepticism in her voice. "I believe in upholding the law," he answered carefully. "If your claim is legitimate and I have no reason to doubt it is, then yes, I'll do everything in my power to see justice done." Their food arrived, steaming hot and smelling delicious. As they ate, Vaughn gently steered the conversation to lighter topics, drawing out details of Delilah's life before today's chaos. He learned she was an only child, educated partly by her schoolteacher mother before her passing 7 years ago, and partly through books her father regularly ordered from back east. She could manage a ranch as competently as any man, ride and shoot with reasonable skill, and had a particular talent for cultivating herb gardens and making medicinal preparations, a skill inherited from her mother. In turn, Delilah discovered that Marshal Vaughn Sadler had come to Arizona Territory after serving in the Union Army during the Civil War, had been a marshal for 8 years, and had requested this posting specifically because of reports of corruption and lawlessness in the region. He was unmarried, enjoyed fishing when time permitted, and had an unexpected fondness for poetry that made him duck his head in slight embarrassment when he admitted it. "Whitman," Delilah guessed, finding this hidden dimension to the stoic lawman utterly charming. "Tennyson, actually," he confessed, "though I've read Whitman too." By the time they finished their meal, the initial awkwardness between them had dissolved into something approaching comfortable familiarity. As they walked back to the marshal's office in the gathering twilight, Delilah found herself studying his profile, appreciating the quiet strength he projected. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "Not just for the meal. For believing me when you had no reason to, for standing against Holloway when it would have been easier not to." Vaughn glanced down at her, his eyes reflecting the last golden rays of sunset. There's always a reason to believe someone brave enough to stand their ground against men with guns. After a pause, he added more softly, "And standing against men like Holloway isn't just my job, it's the right thing to do." Back at the office, he showed her to the spare room simple as promised, with a narrow bed, a small dresser, a washstand, and a window overlooking the quiet back street. "It's not much," he apologized, lighting the lamp on the dresser. "It's perfect," she assured him, overwhelmed again by the strange turns of fortune that had brought her here. "I can't thank you enough." Vaughn shifted slightly, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "There are fresh linens in the dresser. The washroom is through that door. We'll have to share it, I'm afraid. I'll be in the main office for a while yet, so you'll have privacy to settle in." After he left, Delilah sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the day finally catching up with her. Tears she'd held back for hours spilled silently down her cheeks, tears for her father, for her lost home, for the uncertainty of what tomorrow would bring. Yet amid the grief and worry, there was also a peculiar sense of security she hadn't expected to find in this strange town, under the protection of a man she'd known for less than a day. Eventually, she washed her face in the cool water from the pitcher, changed into the oversized shirt Vaughn had lent her as a night dress, and slipped beneath the clean sheets. Despite her tumultuous thoughts, exhaustion quickly pulled her toward sleep. Her last conscious awareness was of the sound of Vaughn moving quietly about the office beyond her door, a reassuring presence standing between her and whatever dangers tomorrow might bring. Dawn broke with golden fingers of light streaming through the small window, gradually drawing Delilah from a deeper sleep than she'd expected to find. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place her surroundings. Then yesterday's events came rushing back: the chase, the confrontation, and the unexpected sanctuary offered by Marshal Sadler. Vaughn, she corrected herself. He'd asked her to use his given name. Rising, she splashed water on her face and attempted to make herself presentable, painfully aware of her limited options in attire. Her once fine blue dress was torn and dirty, hardly suitable for the important meeting ahead. As she contemplated this dilemma, a gentle knock sounded at her door. "Miss Kirkwood, Delilah," Vaughn's voice was low, considerate of the early hour. "Are you awake?" "Yes," she called back, hastily wrapping a blanket around her shoulders over the borrowed shirt. "Just a moment." She opened the door to find him already fully dressed, though his hair was still damp from washing. He held a bundle in his arms, which he extended toward her somewhat awkwardly. "I took the liberty of asking Mrs. Peterson to bring these by. She's about your size," she thought, and was happy to help. At Delilah's surprise, he added quickly, "I didn't share the details of your situation, just that you'd arrived unexpectedly and were in need of some essentials." Delilah accepted the bundle, touched beyond words at his thoughtfulness. Inside, she found a simple but well-made dress, undergarments, a hairbrush, and various other necessities a woman might need. "This is incredibly kind," she managed, emotion thickening her voice. "Please tell Mrs. Peterson I'm deeply grateful." Vaughn nodded, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "Breakfast is ready whenever you are. Nothing fancy, just coffee and biscuits. Then I thought we might ride out to your homestead to gather any evidence before meeting with Holloway." "You'd take me there," hope surged through her. "I wasn't sure when or if I'd be able to return." "Best to see the situation for ourselves," he replied pragmatically. "If we're lucky, the deed and other papers might still be where you left them. That would strengthen our position considerably." An hour later, after a simple but satisfying breakfast during which Vaughn outlined his strategy for the confrontation with Holloway, they were mounted and riding east from town. Vaughn had provided Delilah with a sturdy bay mare from the town's small herd. while he rode his own horse, a magnificent black gelding he called Shadow. As they left the town behind, Delilah found herself studying her companion with growing curiosity. In the morning light, she could better appreciate the strong lines of his profile, the way he sat easy in the saddle like a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. There was something comfortingly solid about him, not just his physical presence, but the sense of unwavering principles that seemed to guide his every action. "How long have you been in Redemption Springs?" she asked as they rode side by side along the well-worn trail. "Going on 2 years now," he replied, adjusting his hat against the strengthening sunlight. "Before that, I was up in the Colorado Territory, and before that, New Mexico. You move around quite a bit for a marshal." A slight smile touched his lips. "I go where I'm needed." The frontiers, changing fast railroads, mining operations, cattle empires, brings opportunities, but also those looking to exploit others. Someone needs to stand for the law. "And that someone is you," she observed, not missing the conviction in his voice. He shrugged modestly. "Just doing the job I signed up for." After a pause, he asked, "What about you? Did you always plan to stay on your father's homestead?" The question gave her pause. "I hadn't really thought beyond it," she admitted. "After Mother died, Father needed me. The ranch became our whole world in many ways. We had plans to expand the orchard this year, maybe build a proper greenhouse for my herbs." She trailed off, the future she'd envisioned now uncertain. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the landscape gradually transitioning from flat plains to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pinyon pines. As they crested a particular rise, Delilah reined her horse to a stop, her breath catching in her throat. Below them, nestled in a small valley with cottonwoods marking the course of a stream, sat the Kirkwood homestead. From this distance, it looked untouched, the modest house with its stone chimney, the barn and corral, the neat rows of the vegetable garden. And beyond that, the small orchard her father had planted when she was just a girl. For a moment, she could almost believe nothing had changed, that her father might be down there mending fences or tending the livestock. Reality intruded harshly when she spotted unfamiliar horses in the corral and smoke rising from the chimney. Someone was there, Holloway's men, most likely. "They've made themselves at home," she said bitterly, hands tightening on the reins. Vaughn surveyed the scene with narrowed eyes. "I count 3 horses, probably the same men who chased you yesterday." He turned to her. "We'll approach openly. I want them to see the badge clearly. Stay close to me and let me do the talking initially." Delilah nodded, anxiety and determination warring within her as they urged their horses down the slope toward what had been, until very recently, her entire world. As they approached the house, the front door opened and a man stepped onto the porch, not Daniel's, but another of Holloway's hired guns she recognized from yesterday's confrontation. He watched their approach with obvious wariness, hand resting near his holstered pistol. "That's far enough." He called when they were about 20 yards from the house. "This is private property." Vaughn reined his horse to a stop, making sure his badge was clearly visible. "Federal Marshal Vaughn Sadler," he announced formally. "I'm here on official business regarding the ownership of this property." The man hesitated, clearly not having expected a marshal to appear. At his silence, 2 more men emerged from the barn, Daniels among them. "Well, if it ain't the meddling marshal," Daniels drawled, approaching with exaggerated confidence. "And he's brought the Kirkwood girl back for a proper eviction. How thoughtful." Vaughn's expression remained impassive. "Miss Kirkwood has made a formal complaint of property theft and document forgery. I'm here to investigate those claims and gather evidence for the territorial court." "There's nothing to investigate," Daniels scoffed. "Mr. Holloway has all the legal papers. This place is his, fair and square." "Then Mr. Holloway won't mind if we look around," Vaughn countered smoothly. "Specifically, we're here to recover Miss Kirkwood's personal belongings and a strongbox containing her father's documents. Unless you have some objection to returning a young woman's personal property." The question was posed innocently enough, but Delilah detected the subtle challenge beneath it. Vaughn was forcing them into a difficult position: deny the request and appear unreasonable, or allow it and risk discovery of evidence against Holloway. Daniels shifted uncomfortably. Boss didn't say nothing about letting anyone poke around. Your boss agreed to a formal review of the property claim this morning at 10 o'clock, Vaughn reminded him. I'm simply conducting the necessary investigation ahead of that meeting. Of course, if you prefer to obstruct a federal investigation, I can return with a properly deputized posse and a warrant. Your choice. The threat was clear, and after a moment of visible indecision, Daniels stepped aside with poor grace. Take what's yours, he grudgingly told Delilah. But the house and land stay Holloway property. We'll see about that, Delilah murmured as she dismounted, though only Vaughn was close enough to hear. He swung down from his own horse and secured both animals to the hitching post. I'll accompany Miss Kirkwood, he informed Daniels firmly. Standard procedure. Inside, Delilah was relieved to find the house largely as she'd left it, though signs of the men's occupation were evident: dirty dishes in the kitchen, muddy boot prints on her mother's handmade rug, the lingering smell of tobacco smoke. She moved purposefully through the main room toward her father's desk in the corner, where the strongbox had been kept. Her heart sank when she saw the desk drawer hanging open, clearly forced, and empty of the metal box that should have contained their most important documents. It's gone, she said, a tremor in her voice. They've taken it. Vaughn examined the broken lock on the drawer. Recently, too, the wood splinters are still fresh. His eyes met hers, understanding the significance. This proves they knew what they were looking for and that they needed to remove it. Delilah nodded grimly. Father kept everything of importance in that box: the deed to the land, bank documents, mother's marriage certificate, my birth record. She glanced around the room, thinking quickly. But there might be something else. She moved to the stone fireplace, running her fingers along the mantelpiece until she found a small irregularity in the wood. Pressing it, a hidden compartment slid open, revealing a slim leather journal. Father's diary, she explained, carefully removing it. He recorded everything about the ranch: expenses, improvements, correspondence with the land office, including, she added with grim satisfaction, his meetings with Holloway and the repeated refusals to sell. Vaughn's eyes lit with understanding. Excellent, that could be crucial evidence. He glanced toward the doorway, where Daniels lurked with obvious suspicion. Gather whatever personal items you need, but do it quickly. I don't want to give them time to send word to Holloway before our meeting. Delilah moved efficiently through the house, collecting a few essential belongings: a change of clothes, her mother's silver hairbrush, a small portrait of her parents on their wedding day, and a few other irreplaceable mementos. She hesitated at the door of her father's bedroom, steeling herself before entering. The room smelled faintly of her father's pipe tobacco, and the sage soap he'd always used, scents that brought an immediate lump to her throat. Pushing aside grief for the moment, she knelt beside the bed and felt beneath it until her fingers closed around a small metal object. What's that? Vaughn asked softly from the doorway, respectfully remaining at a distance. Father's spare revolver, Delilah replied, checking that it was loaded before tucking it into the bag of belongings. Mother insisted we both know how to shoot after a mountain lion took 2 of our sheep. I'm not expert, but I can hit what I aim at. Vaughn nodded approvingly. Good. Though I hope you won't need it. Within half an hour, they had gathered everything Delilah deemed essential and were ready to depart. As they mounted their horses, Daniels approached, his expression sour. Holloway's gonna hear about this, he threatened. I should hope so, Vaughn replied evenly. I look forward to discussing it with him at 10 o'clock, sharp. With a tip of his hat, he turned his horse, Delilah following suit. As they rode away, Delilah couldn't help casting a longing glance back at the only home she'd ever known. Will I ever get it back? She asked quietly once they were out of earshot. Vaughn's expression was determined. The journal helps our case considerably. If we can prove Holloway forged documents, not only will the property revert to you, but he could face serious charges. He glanced at the position of the sun. We should hurry back. I want to review that journal thoroughly before our meeting. The ride back to town passed quickly, both of them preoccupied with thoughts of the confrontation to come. Upon returning to the marshal's office, Vaughn immediately set to examining Samuel Kirkwood's journal while Delilah sorted through her rescued belongings. "Your father was remarkably thorough," Vaughn commented, carefully turning the pages. "He's documented every interaction with Holloway dating back 3 years, including specific details of offers made and rejected." "That was Father's way," Delilah said with a sad smile. "Mother always teased him about writing down even what he had for breakfast each day." Vaughn looked up, an unexpected spark of humor in his eyes. "And did he?" "Actually, yes," she admitted, and they shared a brief moment of laughter that felt surprisingly good amid the tension of the day. As the hour approached 10, Vaughn closed the journal with a satisfied nod. "This, combined with your father's letter showing his true signature, presents a compelling case. Even if Holloway has forged documents, we can establish reasonable doubt about their authenticity." He checked his revolvers, ensuring both were fully loaded, then returned them to their holsters. At Delilah's questioning look, he explained, "I don't anticipate trouble, but Holloway isn't a man who accepts defeat gracefully. Better to be prepared." The door to the office opened precisely at 10 o'clock, admitting Theodore Holloway in an expensive suit that looked out of place in the frontier town. He was accompanied by a nervous-looking man carrying a leather portfolio whom Delilah didn't recognize. "Marshal Sadler," Holloway greeted with forced cordiality. "Miss Kirkwood, I trust we can resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding promptly. This is Mr. Finch, my legal representative." Vaughn gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. "Please be seated." "I appreciate your punctuality, Mr. Holloway." As they arranged themselves, Holloway and his lawyer on one side, Delilah beside Vaughn on the other, the tension in the small office was palpable. Holloway's confident demeanor suggested he believed victory was assured, while Finch nervously arranged documents from his portfolio. "Now then," Vaughn began formally, "we're here to examine competing claims to the property known as the Kirkwood homestead, approximately 15 miles northeast of Redemption Springs. Mr. Holloway claims ownership through purchase, while Miss Kirkwood asserts her father never sold the property and that documents suggesting otherwise are forgeries." He turned to Holloway. "Please present your evidence, sir." With a smug smile, Holloway nodded to Finch, who produced several official-looking documents. "These papers clearly show that Samuel Kirkwood sold his property to the Holloway Cattle Company 3 weeks ago, shortly before his unfortunate passing. You'll note everything is properly signed and witnessed." Vaughn examined the documents carefully. "Who witnessed this transaction, Mr. Holloway?" "Sheriff Graham of Copper Creek and his deputy," Holloway replied smoothly. "Both respected lawmen, I see, and the sale price was $500. Vaughn's eyebrow raised skeptically. "For 160 acres of good land with water rights," Holloway shrugged. "Kirkwood was desperate, dying men often are. He wanted to ensure his daughter had cash rather than land she couldn't manage alone." Delilah bristled. "That's a lie." "My father would never." Vaughn placed a calming hand on her arm before addressing Holloway again. "Mr. Holloway, are you aware that Samuel Kirkwood kept meticulous records of all his business dealings?" Without waiting for an answer, he placed the journal on the desk. "Including 3 separate occasions when he explicitly rejected your offers to purchase his land, the last being for $2,000, significantly more than the amount on this supposed sale document." Holloway's confident expression faltered slightly. "A man can change his mind, indeed. But a man's signature rarely changes so dramatically." Vaughn laid out the letter Delilah had kept in the pocket watch. "This is Samuel Kirkwood's final letter to his daughter, written days before his death. I'd like you to compare the signature here with the one on your purchase agreement." Even to an untrained eye, the differences were obvious. The signature on Holloway's document was a reasonable approximation, but lacked the distinctive flourish on the K that was clearly evident in the genuine letter. "Furthermore," Vaughn continued relentlessly, Miss Kirkwood reports that her father's strongbox containing all official documents, including the deed to the property, has been forcibly removed from the homestead seemingly after your men took possession. Would you care to explain that, Mr. Holloway? Holloway's face had darkened dangerously, but before he could respond, a commotion outside interrupted the proceedings. The office door burst open to reveal Daniels breathing heavily. "Boss," he gasped, "you'd better come quick." "The homestead, it's on fire." Delilah leapt to her feet in horror. "What? No." Vaughn was already reaching for his gun belt. "Everyone stay here," he ordered, but Holloway was already heading for the door. "My property is burning, Marshal. I'm going to see to it." The meaningful look he shot toward Daniels told Vaughn everything he needed to know. "Delilah, stay here," Vaughn instructed firmly. "Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone but me. Understand?" She nodded, though her eyes were wide with fear and anger. "Be careful." As Vaughn rushed out after Holloway and Daniels, Finch remained behind, looking distinctly uncomfortable. The moment they were alone, he began gathering his papers with trembling hands. "He's burning the evidence," Delilah realized aloud. "That's what this is about." "The strongbox, he's destroying it all." Finch wouldn't meet her eyes. "I don't know what you mean, Miss Kirkwood. I'm simply a legal representative doing my job." "Is your job to facilitate fraud, Mr. Finch?" she challenged, advancing on him. "To help a man steal a woman's rightful inheritance through forgery and intimidation," the lawyer blanched. I merely prepared the documents as instructed. I wasn't party to anything improper." "You witnessed a signature you knew wasn't genuine," she pressed. "That makes you complicit in a federal crime." Finch's already pale face went ashen. "You can't prove that." "Perhaps not," she conceded. "But Marshal Sadler is very thorough and very determined. When he returns, he'll have questions for you, difficult ones. If I were in your position, I'd consider carefully where my loyalties lie and whether Theodore Holloway is worth risking prison." The lawyer swallowed hard, clutching his portfolio to his chest like a shield. "What exactly are you suggesting, Miss Kirkwood?" Delilah fixed him with a steady gaze. "I'm suggesting that an honest statement from you about how those documents came to be signed might go a long way toward mitigating your own culpability." Outside, the sound of horses galloping away told her that Holloway and his men were racing toward the homestead. She prayed Vaughn wasn't far behind them. "I need to go," Finch said suddenly, edging toward the door. "I have considerations to make." Delilah didn't try to stop him, knowing his panicked conscience might be their best ally. After he departed, she paced the small office anxiously, torn between obeying Vaughn's instruction to stay put and her desperate need to know what was happening at her home. After what felt like an eternity but was probably less than an hour, she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Peering cautiously through the window, she saw Vaughn dismounting from his horse, alone. She rushed to unlock the door. "What happened?" she demanded as he entered, his face grim and clothes smelling of smoke. "Is it true? Did they burn my home?" Vaughn removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "The house is still standing, but the barn is a total loss. And yes, it was deliberate coal oil used as an accelerant. By the time I arrived, Holloway and his men were already fighting the fire, concentrating on the house while letting the barn burn. The strongbox," Delilah guessed, sinking into a chair. "It would have been moved to the barn." "Almost certainly," Vaughn agreed, his expression dark. "Holloway created a distraction to destroy evidence that would incriminate him. It's not the first time I've seen such tactics, but it's among the more brazen." Delilah fought back tears of anger and despair. "So we've lost, without the deed, without proof." "We haven't lost," Vaughn corrected firmly, kneeling before her chair to meet her eyes directly. "Holloway overplayed his hand. Arson is a serious crime, and I have good reason to believe he orchestrated it. The timing is too convenient, especially coming right when his forged documents were being questioned." "But can you prove it was arson?" Delilah asked. "Or that Holloway was responsible?" Vaughn's mouth curved in a grim smile. "That's where our nervous lawyer friend Mr. Finch might be useful. He was quite disturbed when I left. Did something happen while I was gone?" Delilah related her conversation with Finch, watching approval spread across Vaughn's features. "Well done," he said with genuine admiration. "Finch is the weak link in Holloway's operation. If we can get him to testify about the forgery combined with your father's journal and the evidence of arson, we have a case strong enough to bring to the territorial judge." Hope rekindled in Delilah's heart. "You really think we can win this?" "I do," Vaughn affirmed, rising to his feet. "But we need to move quickly. Holloway will be pressing Finch to maintain his story, and the man doesn't strike me as having much backbone." He crossed to a cabinet and withdrew a bottle and 2 glasses. "I don't normally indulge during working hours," he said, pouring a small measure of amber liquid into each, "but I think we could both use this after the morning we've had." Delilah accepted the glass, the whiskey burning pleasantly as she sipped it. "What's our next step?" "I'll send a telegram to Judge Wilson in Tucson. He's a fair man who's tangled with Holloway before and won't be intimidated. Meanwhile, we need to find Finch before Holloway does." Vaughn drained his glass and set it aside. "I have a deputy in town who can watch the office while I search." "You should remain here where it's safe." "No," Delilah said firmly. "This is my fight too. I'm coming with you." Vaughn studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing her determination against his concern for her safety. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But stay close, and if there's trouble, you do exactly as I say. No heroics." "Agreed," she promised, relieved he wasn't going to treat her like a helpless female who needed protection from the harsh realities of their situation. They spent the next 2 hours combing the small town for any sign of Finch, checking the hotel, the saloon, and other businesses, but the lawyer seemed to have vanished. As afternoon wore on, Delilah began to fear he had already fled, or worse, that Holloway had ensured his silence permanently. They were returning to the marshal's office, discouraged, when a boy of about 12 came running up to them. "Marshal Sadler, Marshal," Vaughn stopped, recognizing the son of the livery stable owner. "What is it, Tommy?" That city feller, the one with the fancy clothes and the big leather case. "He paid Pa for a horse and left town about an hour ago," the boy reported breathlessly. "Heading south on the Tucson Road. Pa thought you might want to know." Vaughn exchanged a significant look with Delilah. "Sounds like Finch is making a run for it." "Did he say anything about where he was going, Tommy?" The boy shook his head. "No, sir, but he seemed mighty nervous, kept looking over his shoulder like he expected trouble." "Thank you, Tommy. Tell your pa I appreciate the information." Vaughn flipped the boy a coin, which he caught with a grin before darting off. "Tucson," Delilah mused. "That's where Judge Wilson is based, isn't it? Maybe Finch is going to turn himself in. Or maybe he's just running from Holloway," Vaughn countered. "Either way, we need to find him before Holloway does. The Tucson Road passes close to Holloway's main ranch. If his men spot Finch, they'll stop him." They hurried back to the livery stable to retrieve their horses. As they prepared to ride out, Vaughn's deputy arrived, a young man named Hank with an earnest face and a somewhat ill-fitting badge. "You wanted to see me, Marshal?" Vaughn nodded, quickly explaining the situation. "I need you to guard the office and send that telegram to Judge Wilson immediately. If Holloway or any of his men come to town, keep an eye on them, but don't engage unless absolutely necessary. Understand?" "Yes, sir," Hank replied, clearly proud to be entrusted with such responsibility. "What about Miss Kirkwood's belongings?" "Move them to my personal quarters for safekeeping," Vaughn instructed. "And Hank, be careful. Holloway's desperate, and desperate men are unpredictable." With that final warning, they set off at a brisk pace toward the Tucson Road, hoping to overtake Finch before he encountered Holloway's men or Holloway himself. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly as they rode, making Delilah grateful for the borrowed hat Vaughn had insisted she wear. "How far do you think he's gotten?" she asked as they followed the dusty trail southward. "Depends on how fast he's riding," Vaughn replied, scanning the horizon. "Finch doesn't strike me as an experienced horseman. If he's pushing hard, maybe 10 miles by now. If he's being cautious, less." They maintained a steady pace, not wanting to exhaust their horses, but keenly aware of the need for haste. After about an hour, they crested a rise that offered a view of the trail ahead, winding through a scrubby valley before disappearing into a stand of cottonwoods that marked a creek crossing. Vaughn reined in, squinting against the sun. "There," he said, pointing to a small figure on horseback just entering the cottonwood grove. "That has to be Finch." As if in confirmation of his words, 3 riders emerged from the trees, cutting off Finch's path. Even at this distance, the red neckerchiefs of Holloway's men were visible. "They've got him," Delilah breathed. "What now?" Vaughn's expression hardened as he checked his revolvers. "Now we intervene. Stay behind me, but be ready to ride hard if things go badly." They urged their horses forward, moving faster now that they had a clear target. As they approached the grove, they could hear raised voices, Finch's high-pitched protests contrasting with the deeper, threatening tones of Holloway's men. "Federal Marshal." Vaughn called out as they entered the shade of the cottonwoods. "Step away from that man." The tableau before them froze Finch on his horse, surrounded by 3 of Holloway's hands, one of whom had a pistol drawn and pointed at the terrified lawyer. At Vaughn's appearance, the armed man cursed and swung his weapon toward this new threat. Vaughn's reaction was lightning fast. His revolver cleared its holster and fired before the cowhand could adjust his aim. The man cried out, his pistol dropping from suddenly nerveless fingers as blood blossomed on his shoulder. "Next one won't be so considerate of your health," Vaughn warned, his gun now trained on the other 2 men. "Hands where I can see them, gentlemen." The wounded man clutched his shoulder, moaning, while his companions slowly raised their hands. Finch looked ready to faint with relief. "Marshal Sadler," he stammered. "Thank God you've come. These men, they said Mr. Holloway wanted a word with me. I believe they meant to kill me." "That's a lie," protested one of the remaining cowhands. "Boss just wanted to talk business. This jumpy fool panicked for no reason." "Business conducted at gunpoint rarely ends well for one party," Vaughn observed dryly. He gestured to Delilah. "Miss Kirkwood, please relieve these gentlemen of their firearms while I tend to our wounded friend here." Delilah moved forward confidently, drawing her father's revolver and keeping it trained on the men while retrieving their guns with her free hand. She might not be an expert shot, but at this range, it hardly mattered, a fact not lost on Holloway's men, who surrendered their weapons without further protest. Vaughn dismounted to examine the wounded man's shoulder. "Clean through the muscle, you'll live," he pronounced. "But you'll need a doctor sooner rather than later." He tore a strip from the man's own bandana and fashioned a crude but effective bandage to stem the bleeding. "Now," he said, addressing all 3 cowhands, "you have a choice. You can ride back to Holloway and explain how you failed to silence Mr. Finch, or you can come with me to Redemption Springs and provide sworn statements about Holloway's instructions regarding Mr. Finch here." The men exchanged uneasy glances. "Holloway will kill us if we talk," one muttered. "And I'll arrest you for attempted murder and conspiracy if you don't," Vaughn countered evenly. "At least in jail you'll be beyond Holloway's reach." After a moment's hesitation, the wounded man spoke up. "I ain't dying for Theodore Holloway, he ain't worth it." His companions reluctantly nodded their agreement. Vaughn smiled grimly. "Wise decision. Now, Mr. Finch, I believe you were heading to Tucson." The lawyer nodded nervously. "Yes, I've decided I cannot continue to represent Mr. Holloway in this matter. There are ethical considerations." "Indeed there are," Vaughn agreed, "including the matter of your own participation in document forgery." Finch paled. "I was coerced. Holloway threatened my family if I didn't cooperate." "I'm sure Judge Wilson will take that into consideration," Vaughn said. "Especially if you're willing to provide a complete statement about Holloway's methods and the specific forgeries you witnessed." As they organized their expanded party for the return journey to Redemption Springs, Delilah found herself watching Vaughn with growing admiration. He handled the situation with a perfect balance of authority and restraint, never losing his composure even when faced with armed resistance. The ride back was slower than their outward journey, constrained by the need to accommodate the wounded man. As they traveled, Finch gradually overcame his initial terror and began to talk, seemingly eager to unburden himself now that he had committed to the truth. "It wasn't just the Kirkwood property," he confessed. Holloway has been using similar tactics throughout the territory: forged documents, intimidation, strategic fires that destroy competing claims. He's determined to control all the water rights before the railroad arrives, knowing it will multiply the value of his holdings tenfold. How many other properties has he stolen this way? Delilah asked, thinking of other families who might have suffered as she had. Finch looked ashamed. At least 6 that I know of directly, probably more before I became involved. And you prepared the legal documents for all of them? Vaughn asked, his tone neutral but his eyes hard. Yes, Finch admitted miserably. I told myself I was just doing my job, that I wasn't responsible for how Holloway acquired the signatures, but deep down I knew. By the time they reached Redemption Springs, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the main street. Their arrival caused an immediate stir, the marshal returning with 3 of Holloway's men in tow, 1 wounded, plus the lawyer who had departed so hastily earlier that day. Deputy Hank met them outside the office, his young face alight with excitement. Marshal, I sent that telegram like you asked, and you'll never believe what happened while you were gone. What is it, Hank? Vaughn asked, dismounting stiffly after the long ride. Holloway himself came to town, madder than a wet cat, looking for Finch, the deputy reported. When he couldn't find him, he started making threats, saying anyone who helped you or Miss Kirkwood would regret it. He was in the saloon, getting louder by the minute, when the stage from Tucson arrived. Hank paused dramatically, clearly enjoying his moment as the bearer of important news. And who should step off that stage but Judge Wilson himself? Seems he was already on his way here on other business. When he heard Holloway making threats against a federal marshal, he came straight to the office to find out what was happening. Vaughn's eyebrows rose in surprise. Judge Wilson is here now? Yes, sir. He's waiting at Mrs. Peterson's cafe. Said to tell you he'd appreciate a full briefing as soon as you returned. Vaughn turned to Delilah, a rare smile lighting his face. It seems fortune is with us today. Judge Wilson is exactly who we need to resolve this situation properly. And Holloway, she asked, where is he now? Still at the saloon last I saw, Hank replied, getting drunker and louder, saying he owns this town and everyone in it. Not for much longer, Vaughn murmured. He turned to Finch and the 3 cowhands. Hank, lock these men in the cells for now, separate them so they can't coordinate their stories. The wounded one needs a doctor, send for Dr. Miller. I'll take Mr. Finch with me to meet the judge. What about me? Delilah asked, not wanting to be sidelined at this crucial moment. Vaughn considered her question. This is your fight too, he acknowledged. You should be there to present your case directly. Mrs. Peterson's cafe was nearly empty as the dinner hour had not yet arrived, making it an ideal location for their impromptu legal proceeding. Judge Amos Wilson, a tall, lean man with a shock of white hair and penetrating blue eyes, sat at a corner table, nursing a cup of coffee as they entered. Marshal Sadler, he greeted, rising to his feet. I've heard some disturbing accounts of Theodore Holloway's activities in this region. It seems my visit is timely. Indeed it is, Your Honor, Vaughn agreed, making introductions. Miss Delilah Kirkwood, whose property is at the center of the current dispute, and Mr. Finch, who until recently served as Holloway's legal representative. The judge's shrewd eyes assessed them both before he gestured for them to be seated. I understand there are allegations of document forgery, intimidation, and now arson, serious charges if proven. For the next hour, the judge listened carefully as Delilah recounted the events following her father's death. Vaughn detailed his investigation and the confrontation at the creek crossing. And Finch, with increasing candor, described Holloway's systematic campaign to acquire properties through fraudulent means. The man has built an empire on forgeries and threats, Finch concluded, looking thoroughly miserable but also relieved. I have records, copies of documents, correspondence, notes of meetings that will substantiate everything I've said. Judge Wilson's expression had grown increasingly grave. This goes beyond a simple property dispute. What you're describing, Mr. Finch, is an organized criminal enterprise. A commotion from the street interrupted their conversation, raised voices, the sound of breaking glass, and then a gunshot. They rushed to the window to see Theodore Holloway staggering in the middle of the street, a pistol in his hand, shouting incoherently. A crowd had gathered at a safe distance, watching the spectacle of the usually composed businessman's drunken rage. Sadler. Holloway bellowed, firing another wild shot into the air. "Come out and face me, you interfering bastard, you and that Kirkwood bitch," Vaughn's jaw tightened. "Stay here," he instructed Delilah and Finch before turning to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd appreciate if you'd witness what happens next." Judge Wilson nodded grimly. "Of course, Marshal." Vaughn checked his revolvers, then strode out onto the street, his steps measured and calm despite the armed, drunken man awaiting him. Delilah watched through the window, her heart in her throat. Holloway. Vaughn called, stopping about 20 yards from the swaying figure. "Put down the gun. You're drunk and making a fool of yourself." "There you are," Holloway slurred, turning to face him with the pistol wavering in his unsteady hand. "You've ruined everything, you know that. Years of work building something that would have made this backward territory into something great. You built nothing," Vaughn replied evenly. "You stole from honest people who worked the land with their own hands. Now put down the gun before someone gets hurt." Holloway's face twisted with rage. "I'm Theodore Holloway. I own half this territory. I don't take orders from some self-righteous lawman." "Last chance," Vaughn warned, his hand hovering near his holster. "Drop the weapon." For a moment, it seemed Holloway might comply, his expression faltering as some glimmer of sense penetrated his alcohol-fueled rage. Then his eyes hardened, and with a roar of defiance, he raised his pistol toward Vaughn. The marshal's draw was so swift it was almost invisible to the watching crowd. His first shot struck Holloway's gun hand, sending the weapon spinning away. The second caught the would-be land baron in the shoulder, spinning him around before he collapsed to the dirt street, howling in pain. Vaughn approached cautiously, kicking Holloway's fallen pistol well out of reach before kneeling to examine his wounds. "Neither is life-threatening," he announced to the stunned onlookers. "Someone fetch Dr. Miller, he's going to be busy tonight." As townsfolk hurried to comply, Deputy Hank arrived, breathless from running. "Marshal, I heard the shots. Help me get Mr. Holloway to a cell," Vaughn instructed. "He's under arrest for attempted murder, among other charges." From the cafe doorway, Judge Wilson observed the scene with grave approval. "Well handled, Marshal Sadler. I believe I've seen enough to make some preliminary rulings in this matter." Later that evening, in the privacy of the marshal's office with Holloway secured in a cell and receiving medical attention, Judge Wilson delivered his initial findings. Seated behind Vaughn's desk with an air of formal authority, he addressed Delilah directly. "Miss Kirkwood, based on the evidence presented and the testimony of Mr. Finch, I am issuing an immediate injunction restoring your full ownership rights to the property known as Kirkwood Homestead. All claims by Theodore Holloway or his associates are hereby declared null and void." He signed a document with a flourish and handed it to her. "This will serve until formal proceedings can restore your deed." Tears of relief and vindication filled Delilah's eyes as she accepted the paper. "Thank you, Your Honor." "As for Mr. Holloway," the judge continued, "he will remain in custody pending a full trial on multiple counts of fraud, forgery, intimidation, and attempted murder. Given the scope of his activities as described by Mr. Finch, I anticipate additional charges will be forthcoming as other victims come forward." "And my role in these matters?" Finch asked nervously. Judge Wilson fixed him with a stern gaze. "Your cooperation will be noted, Mr. Finch. While you cannot escape all consequences of your actions, providing evidence against Holloway and making restitution to those harmed will certainly influence the court's final judgment." After the judge departed to his hotel room for the night, promising a more comprehensive hearing the following day, Delilah and Vaughn found themselves alone in the office, the events of the extraordinary day finally catching up with them. "I can hardly believe it," Delilah said softly, staring at the injunction in her hands. "This morning I was a homeless fugitive, and now Now you have your home back, Vaughn finished for her, his voice warm with satisfaction. It's what should have happened from the beginning. She looked up at him, trying to find words adequate to express her gratitude. I don't know how to thank you. What you did today, facing Holloway like that, risking your life, I was just doing my job, he demurred, though color touched his cheeks at her praise. No, Delilah insisted. It was more than that. You believed me when no one else would. You stood up for what was right when it would have been easier to look the other way. She hesitated, then added softly, and you gave me a place to stay when I had nowhere else to go. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a recognition of feelings that had been building steadily beneath the surface of their shared ordeal. Vaughn took a step closer, then seemed to catch himself. You should get some rest, he said gently. Tomorrow will be another long day with the judge's formal hearings. And then you'll need to decide what comes next, returning to your homestead, rebuilding what was damaged. The thought of returning to her home alone, with all its memories of her father, suddenly seemed less appealing than it had just hours earlier. Yes, she agreed hesitantly. Though I admit the thought of going back there by myself is daunting, Vaughn's expression softened with understanding. You don't have to decide everything tonight, and whatever you choose, you won't be alone unless you want to be. This community will support you. Mrs. Peterson has already been asking how she can help, and others will follow her lead. And you, Delilah asked, unable to stop herself. Will you be part of that support? Something flickered in his gray-blue eyes, something that made her breath catch. For as long as you want me to be, he promised quietly. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities, until the sound of Dr. Miller arriving to check on his patients broke the spell. As Vaughn went to admit the doctor, Delilah retreated to her temporary quarters, her mind and heart racing with thoughts not just of her recovered home, but of the man who had helped her reclaim it and who, perhaps, might become part of whatever future she now faced. The following week brought dramatic changes to Redemption Springs and the surrounding territory. Judge Wilson, recognizing the importance of the case, extended his stay to conduct thorough hearings into Theodore Holloway's activities. As Finch had predicted, additional victims came forward once word spread of Holloway's arrest, each with similar stories of forgeries, intimidation, and theft for Delilah. The days passed in a whirlwind of testimonies, legal proceedings, and beginning the process of reclaiming her life. The town rallied around her cause, with several men volunteering to help rebuild her burned barn and repair the damage Holloway's men had caused to the homestead. Through it all, Vaughn remained a steady presence at her side, providing support both professional and personal. Their relationship evolved subtly but unmistakably, shifting from the initial marshal and victim dynamic to something deeper and more complex. They found reasons to spend time together even when official business didn't require its shared meals at Mrs. Peterson's cafe, evening walks along the quiet streets of Redemption Springs, conversations that stretched long into the night. On the afternoon, when Judge Wilson delivered his final rulings officially restoring property to all of Holloway's victims, and ordering the land baron to stand trial in Tucson for his numerous crimes, Vaughn found Delilah sitting alone on the bench outside his office, staring thoughtfully at the newly reissued deed to her father's property. Everything in order? He asked, settling beside her. She nodded, managing a small smile. Yes, it's official now. The Kirkwood homestead is mine again, free and clear. You don't sound as happy as I'd expected, he observed gently. Delilah sighed, trying to sort through her conflicted emotions. I am happy, relieved, grateful. It's just going back there alone. The house will be so empty without father, and after everything that's happened, it doesn't feel quite like home anymore. Vaughn was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. A home isn't just a place, Delilah. It's the people who fill it, the memories you make there. I know, she agreed softly. That's what makes it hard. All my memories of that place include my father, or now Holloway's men invading it. Another silence fell between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Vaughn cleared his throat. I've been thinking about something, and perhaps now is the time to mention it. My appointment as marshal here is flexible. Delilah turned to him, surprised. What do you mean? I mean that I took this posting because it needed someone willing to stand up to Holloway. With him headed for prison, that particular mission is accomplished. He hesitated, then continued more boldly. I've been offered other positions, including one as a circuit judge's lawman that would allow me more independence. You're leaving Redemption Springs? The thought sent an unexpected pang through Delilah's heart. Not necessarily, he said, his eyes meeting hers directly. It would depend on certain factors. What factors? She asked, though something in his gaze told her she already knew the answer. Vaughn took a deep breath. Delilah, these past days have been extraordinary in many ways. We've faced danger together, seen justice done, and in the process, I've come to admire you more than I can properly express. Her heart began to race as he continued. Your courage, your determination, your compassion, they've shown me a woman unlike any I've known before. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. I know it's been a short time and you have much to consider with your homestead and future, but I find myself hoping that future might include me in whatever capacity you'd welcome. Delilah's throat tightened with emotion. Vaughn, are you courting me? A smile touched his lips, genuine and slightly shy. I'm trying to, though perhaps not very skillfully. It's been some time since I've attempted such things. She laughed softly, turning her hand to clasp his more firmly. On the contrary, I think you're doing quite well. Growing serious again, she added, I've come to care for you too, more than I expected was possible after so brief an acquaintance. Then perhaps, he suggested carefully, we might explore those feelings further, see where they lead us. I'd like that, Delilah agreed, warmth spreading through her at the future suddenly opening before her one far brighter than she could have imagined a week ago. Vaughn's smile deepened as he raised her hand to his lips in a gesture both courtly and intimate. Then may I have the honor of escorting you to dinner this evening, Miss Kirkwood? Mrs. Peterson has promised her special apple pie for dessert. I would be delighted, Marshal Sadler, she replied, happiness bubbling up inside her like a desert spring after rain. As they walked together toward the cafe, Delilah reflected on the strange path that had brought her to this moment. A week ago, she had lost everything: her father, her home, her sense of security. Now, while her grief remained, she had regained her property, found justice, and perhaps most surprisingly, discovered the possibility of a new beginning with this honorable, steady man beside her. The words he had spoken during their first meeting echoed in her mind. Then you'll have mine till you find yours. He had offered shelter when she needed it most, never expecting anything in return. Now, as they stood on the threshold of something new and promising, she realized that perhaps they might eventually build a home together, one that belonged to them both. Summer faded into autumn, painting the cottonwoods along the creek in vibrant gold and bringing cooler nights to the high desert. Delilah's homestead gradually transformed under the combined efforts of many hands, the burned barn rebuilt larger and sturdier than before, fences mended, fields prepared for next season's planting. Theodore Holloway's trial in Tucson had concluded with a lengthy prison sentence, bringing closure not just to Delilah, but to all those who had suffered under his predatory business practices. Through these changing seasons, Vaughn and Delilah's relationship deepened and flourished. Their courtship proceeded with a blend of traditional propriety and the practical partnership that frontier life often demanded. Vaughn rode out to the homestead regularly, sometimes staying for days to help with heavier work, always careful to maintain appearances by sleeping in the newly rebuilt barn despite Delilah's assurances that the neighbors were too distant to gossip. On a crisp October evening, they sat together on the porch swing Vaughn had built as a surprise for Delilah's 23rd birthday. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard where her father's dogs, now hers, played, having finally returned from wherever they had fled during Holloway's occupation. The apple trees have recovered nicely, Vaughn observed, his arm comfortably around her shoulders. You'll have a good harvest next year, Delilah nodded, leaning into his warmth, Father would be pleased. He always said those trees were his legacy. After a moment, she added more softly, I think he would have liked you. I hope so, Vaughn replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. From everything you've told me about him, his approval would have meant a great deal. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the sky's colors deepen from gold to amber to dusky purple. Finally, Vaughn straightened slightly, his demeanor shifting to one Delilah had come to recognize as his prelude to discussing something important. I received a letter today, he began, his voice carefully neutral, from the territorial governor's office. Delilah turned to look at him, curious at his tone. What did it say? I've been offered the position of district marshal, he explained. It would mean overseeing law enforcement for the entire southeastern portion of the territory. Vaughn, that's wonderful. She exclaimed, genuinely delighted for him. It's the recognition you deserve after exposing Holloway's crimes. He smiled at her enthusiasm, but something tentative remained in his expression. It would mean more responsibility, more travel between the various towns in the district. I understand, she assured him, though a small knot of anxiety formed in her stomach at the thought of seeing him less frequently. It's an important position, you should accept it. There's something else, he continued, turning to face her more directly. The position comes with a house in Tucson, the previous marshal's residence. It's nothing grand, but it's solid and spacious, with room for a family. The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Delilah's heart began to race as Vaughn reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Delilah, he said, his voice deepening with emotion, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, seeing your strength and determination, falling in love with your spirit and your heart, it's changed me in ways I never expected. He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring, a small diamond flanked by 2 sapphires that reminded her of his eyes. I know your home is here, and I would never ask you to abandon what you fought so hard to reclaim, but I'm hoping we might build a new home together, wherever that may be. Tears welled in Delilah's eyes as he continued. I love you, Delilah Kirkwood. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? For a breathless moment, she was too overcome to speak. Then, with joy bubbling up from her very soul, she whispered, Yes, Vaughn, yes, with all my heart. His face transformed with happiness as he slid the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a tender kiss that spoke of promises and shared futures. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Delilah rested her forehead against his. I've been thinking about the homestead, she confessed, about what it means to me and what Father would have wanted. Vaughn listened attentively as she continued. This land was his dream, his legacy, but he built it for us to thrive, not to be chained to it out of obligation or memory. She traced the lines of Vaughn's face with gentle fingers. I think he would understand if I chose to follow my heart now, especially knowing the property would still serve a good purpose. What are you saying? Vaughn asked, hardly daring to hope. I'm saying that perhaps the Kirkwood homestead could become something new, a place for others who need a fresh start. The Wilsons lost everything to Holloway before we stopped him. They're good people, experienced ranchers. They could work this land, make it flourish. Understanding dawned in Vaughn's eyes. You'd lease the property to them, Delilah nodded, with an option to purchase eventually if they wish. The arrangement would provide income while we establish ourselves in Tucson, and more importantly, it would honor Father's memory by ensuring the land continues to support a family who will care for it properly. And you'd be comfortable leaving? He asked, wanting to be certain. She smiled, surprising herself with the certainty of her answer. You once offered me shelter when I had none, saying you'll have mine till you find yours. What I've discovered, Vaughn, is that home isn't just a place, it's where love dwells. She placed her hand over his heart. My home is with you now, wherever we may go. The depth of emotion in his eyes nearly undid her as he pulled her close again. I will spend every day of our lives ensuring you never regret that decision, he vowed. I know, she whispered against his lips before kissing him again, sealing their promise beneath the vast Arizona sky. Their wedding took place on New Year's Day, 1882, in the small church of Redemption Springs. The entire town turned out for the celebration, along with visitors from surrounding communities who had come to know Vaughn through his work and Delilah through the widely publicized case against Holloway. Judge Wilson himself returned to perform the ceremony, declaring it one of the happier duties of his judicial career. Mrs. Peterson outdid herself with a wedding feast that would be talked about for years to come. Deputy Hank, now promoted to town marshal following Vaughn's elevation to district marshal, proposed the first toast to the couple. Even Mr. Finch attended, pardoned for his role in Holloway's schemes in exchange for his testimony, now working to make amends by helping other victims of land fraud. As Delilah and Vaughn shared their first dance as husband and wife, she caught a glimpse of her father's pocket watch, now carried proudly by her new husband, a wedding gift from her, connecting past to present to future. Happy. Vaughn murmured against her ear as they swayed to the fiddler's melody. Beyond words, she answered truthfully, secure in the circle of his arms and the life they were building together. Spring found them settled in their Tucson home, a comfortable adobe structure with a courtyard garden that Delilah was gradually transforming with medicinal herbs and flowering plants. Vaughn's work kept him busy but fulfilled, and he always returned to her with stories of justice served and communities protected. Meanwhile, Delilah had found her own purpose, using her knowledge of herbal remedies to assist the local doctor and establishing a small business preparing medicines that quickly gained popularity throughout the growing city. Their home became known for its hospitality, with an open door for travelers, colleagues, and friends. Judge Wilson was a frequent visitor, as were the Wilsons from the former Kirkwood homestead, who reported that the apple trees had indeed produced abundantly that year, just as Vaughn had predicted. One evening in late April, as they sat together in their courtyard beneath a sky ablaze with stars, Delilah took Vaughn's hand and placed it gently over her still flat stomach. "I have news," she said softly, watching his expression shift from confusion to dawning comprehension to pure joy. "A baby," he whispered, awe and delight mingling in his voice. "We're going to have a child," she nodded, her own happiness reflected in his shining eyes. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. By winter, there will be 3 of us." Vaughn gathered her carefully into his arms, pressing reverent kisses to her hair, her forehead, her lips. "Delilah," he breathed, seemingly unable to find words adequate to express his emotions. "I know," she replied, understanding perfectly, "our family." As they sat entwined beneath the vast desert sky, planning and dreaming of the life their child would have, Delilah marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From the desperate flight through Redemption Springs with Holloway's men at her heels, to this moment of perfect contentment in the arms of the man who had first offered her shelter and then given her his heart. "He stole my home," she had cried in that first desperate meeting, never imagining that loss would lead her to a far greater treasure. "Then you'll have mine till you find yours," Vaughn had promised, a simple offer of temporary refuge that had ultimately become so much more. Their home now, this one they had built together with love and trust, was stronger than any walls of wood or stone. It would shelter not just them, but the generations to come, a legacy far more enduring than land or property alone could provide. As the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, Vaughn and Delilah Sadler held each other close, their shared love a beacon in the wilderness, their entwined lives a testament to the unexpected ways that even the darkest moments could lead to the brightest of futures. On a bright December morning in 1882, Samuel Vaughn Sadler entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the Sadler home in Tucson. Named for his maternal grandfather and his father, the healthy baby boy immediately captured the hearts of everyone who encountered him, particularly his besotted parents. "He has your eyes," Delilah observed tiredly but happily as she cradled their newborn son while Vaughn sat beside her on their bed, his arm protectively around them both. "And your determination," Vaughn countered with a smile, gently stroking his son's downy head. Did you hear how forcefully he announced his arrival? The entire neighborhood must know he's here. The first years of young Samuel's life unfolded amid love and security. With both parents devoted to creating the kind of home neither had fully experienced in their own childhoods, Delilah having lost her mother young, and Vaughn rarely speaking of his own troubled family history before the war. By the time Samuel was 3, the Sadler household expanded again with the arrival of his sister, Elizabeth Rose, named for both grandmothers. The family settled into a rhythm that balanced Vaughn's responsibilities as district marshal with his commitment to being present for every important moment in his children's lives. Delilah's herbal medicine business flourished, evolving into a proper apothecary shop on Tuckson's Main Street, where she worked several days a week while a capable nanny helped with the children. Her remedies gained such reputation that even physicians began recommending them, particularly for conditions where conventional medicine offered little relief. Their home remained a gathering place for friends and colleagues, with Mrs. Peterson visiting from Redemption Springs whenever possible, always bearing her famous apple pies and delighting in spoiling the Sadler children. Judge Wilson, now retired but still sharp as ever, became a grandfather figure to Samuel and Elizabeth, regaling them with carefully edited stories from his days on the bench. As the years passed and the children grew, Vaughn and Delilah's love deepened and matured. The passionate romance of their early days evolved into a partnership of profound trust and understanding, though the spark between them never dimmed a fact that occasionally embarrassed their children when they caught their parents stealing kisses in the kitchen or holding hands beneath the dinner table. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vaughn surprised Delilah with a trip back to Redemption Springs and the former Kirkwood homestead, now the thriving Wilson Ranch. The apple orchard her father had planted had expanded under the Wilsons' care, becoming known throughout the territory for its exceptional fruit. Standing beneath those trees, now tall and abundant with spring blossoms, Delilah felt her father's presence more strongly than she had in years. "He would be so pleased," she said softly, leaning against her husband's sturdy shoulder. "Not just with the orchard, but with everything our family, our life together." Vaughn's arm tightened around her waist. "I like to think he had a hand in bringing us together," he said. "That somehow he guided you to Redemption Springs that day, knowing I'd be there to help." "A matchmaking angel," Delilah teased, though the idea brought comfort rather than skepticism. "Why not?" Vaughn replied with a smile. "It would explain how I got so fortunate as to win the heart of the most extraordinary woman I've ever known." Even after a decade of marriage, his words could still bring a blush to her cheeks and warmth to her heart. "I'm the fortunate one," she countered, turning in his arms to face him. "You gave me shelter when I had none, believed in me when others wouldn't, and loved me when I least expected it. And I'll continue doing all those things for the rest of our lives," he promised, sealing the vow with a kiss as gentle spring breezes carried apple blossoms down around them like nature's own blessing. As they returned to their children waiting at the Wilson farmhouse, hand in hand beneath the orchard's canopy, both silently acknowledged how far they had come from that fateful day when a desperate woman fleeing for her life had literally crashed into the path of a steadfast lawman. "He stole my home," she had cried then, heartbroken and afraid. "Then you'll have mine till you find yours," he had answered, never imagining those simple words would lead to a lifetime of shared love, purpose, and family. Home, they had both discovered, was never just a place of wood and stone, but rather the sanctuary created when two hearts find each other and build something enduring together, a truth their children would carry forward into their own lives, ensuring that the legacy begun on that dusty street in Redemption Springs would continue for generations to come.